Good evening. All right. I hear the telltale echo. It looks like we're live. Well, good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to see such an excellent turnout here at the Civic Center this evening. My name is Jeff Durham. I am your Associate Curator of Himalayan Art here at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. Thank you for coming out for an exploration of Tibetan artistic tradition, Himalayan artistic tradition, and its transformation with featured awakened artist Tsherin Sherpa. Now, over the course of our discussion, we'll examine some of his works, we'll look at his inspiration, or rather let him tell us about it, which is probably the better way to go. We'll also listen to his uniquely cosmopolitan perspective on history and culture as regards Himalayan art. My guess is that you and I will find a number of our preconceptions challenged and perhaps even melted. So here you see the flagship image of our exhibition, Tsherin Sherpa's The Melt. And it is one of the most, can I say mind-eye bending? Yeah, that's how to put it. One of the most mind-eye bending works you'll ever encounter. And its reality challenging geometries can and should be explored in detail downstairs in Awaken under gorgeously perfect lighting. Rest assured, we're going to take a nice long look at this artwork later this evening in due course, and we'll also try to leave plenty of time for your many questions, which I know you'll have. But first I want to point out that we also feature one of Mr. Sherpa's works on the cover of the exhibition catalog. It is there not merely because it is masterfully executed and visually stunning, but because its story and that of the exhibition run so closely parallel, as you'll discover when you get to it downstairs. So, for right now, let's keep this real simple. We often think about people being on the cutting edge of this, that, or the other thing, but in the present case, Mr. Sherpa is the cutting edge of Himalayan art traditions as they move into the 21st century. So, without further unsolicited comment from myself, here he is, Mr. Tsherin Sherpa. Now, of course, you are going to have to put up with a little bit more brief intro here, and I'll kind of guide things along. Here we see the man himself. He's at the Bodhnath Stupa in Kathmandu, Nepal. And Tsherin, I'd like to thank you very much personally for coming all the way out here from Nepal to be with us for our awakening opening. Much better echo now. Thank you for coming to share your work with our community. Really do appreciate that. And to get the ball rolling this evening, I wanted to ask you about some of the issues that you raise in your very powerful and actually quite frank essay in the Awaken catalog, especially as regards the state of art practice presently in the Himalayas. In your essay, you describe something of a wicked situation on the ground, but one that nonetheless has a lot of promise to it. If I may quote, you say that the Tonka trade in Kathmandu seems to be thriving, but really there is a malaise. I wonder if you could expand for our visitors on that.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jeff, for the wonderful introduction. Yes, in regards to the thangka painting tradition, especially in Kathmandu, from what I observed in the last few decades, it appears to be thriving because there are more stores, more people painting them, and also the commercial aspect of it looks like it's booming a lot. But the fact that traditional art was actually initially or ultimately painted for one's practice, and I guess what I'm really concerned about is the quality of the work, which has degraded in the last several decades. Many factories have sprung up, meaning like they basically, these factories cater to the souvenir stores. So thangkas, from becoming one of these very highly spiritual art practice, it has become somewhat of a very cheap souvenir product. And to meet the market demand, there are like all of these so-called factories. And many of the artists also, even recently I was talking to some of the Himalayan artists who happen to come from the remote areas of Nepal. And I was actually trying to hire some assistants for my own studio. And I found out many of these young artists who are actually helping in projects like painting monastery murals, making thangkas. Many of them are not fully trained. They are only trained in color application, which is kind of like the most basic part of traditional thangka painting. And after they complete their education, like in 6 months or so, in learning how to apply the paints or blend two colors or something like that, they right away go on to find a job somewhere because of the financial strains, or also because there's a huge demand for these basic workers. So in a place like, there's a place called Helambu in Nepal. From Helambu itself, I found out there are over 2,000 artists. And among them, I think only 5 or 6 are fully trained traditional thangka artists.
This seems very ironic, because if we walk through the streets of Kathmandu, we will see thangka schools all over the place.
Yes.
You're suggesting that these may not be actual schools in the traditional sense.
Yes, these are actually, they call it school nowadays, but I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago they were still called factories. Basically somebody would employ a large number of artists and provide them minimal salary, whatever, and then teach them certain techniques so that they can produce this large number of thangkas. And also, most of the time-consuming part in thangka painting is actually painting. So there is a stage where there's a paint application, and then there is a shading where one goes over a dry paint with a thinner paint, darker shade, and does this gradation over it. And that process takes a long time. And most of these so-called artists that I came across in Kathmandu were mostly trained in only paint application and this this particular specific technique.
So while it looks like the market really is flourishing, you see thangka shops all over the place, and it looks like you have a lot of employment. In fact, this is gross underemployment.
Yes, and I know of some artists who have been painting thangkas for the last 10, 12 years, and they only know how to apply paint and do gradation over it. They don't know how to sketch. They don't know any symbolism of the deities. They don't know anything. So sometimes they may attempt to create a thangka by themselves also, just by looking at some of the other works that have been done by some other teachers or old thangkas or something like that, and just taking it as an example, sample, just to copy it or try to replicate it without understanding what they're actually making. Yeah?
It's as if you know how to put one part of the car together, and so then you try to build the whole car.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What a thing. I'd like to show you a couple of images now that speak to some of the history of how things got this way in Nepal, and get your impressions here. One of the things that I really enjoyed about working with and reading your essay was how is your approach to the historical evolution of the Himalayan art traditions. You identify a couple of phases and a couple of players, both of which appear on the scene here in this slide, as it turns out. I wonder if you might talk to us a little bit about how the Himalayan lamas and the Euro-American hippies each played a role in shaping the tradition as you knew it during your apprenticeship.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Kathmandu Valley, and my father is a practicing traditional thangka artist. So I remember growing up like around him, and he used to, back in the early 70s, there was already mushrooming like trade occurring on traditional thangka paintings. And because many Tibetan lamas had come there and to settle in Kathmandu around this sacred space called, sacred site called Bodhanath Stupa. And my parents were also living there at that time. And because of the growing number of monasteries, there were also like growing number of trades on traditional art, thangkas, as well as sculpture, statues, other ritual objects. And then I think in the 70s we also started seeing growing number of visitors coming to Nepal during the hippie era and also later on. Then this artwork started to, they wanted to meet the demand of the visitors. Everybody would buy some work, assuming this is taking it more like a souvenir or also sometimes art, you know. Then I think then the middleman emerged, someone who would open up a shop to provide, cater to all of these tourists. And then I think this is how it started to expand more and more to the point where now it's I think even the Nepalese government believes that it's handicraft industry which needs to be supported. And I mean, it's a good point to support the handicraft industry, but at the same time, from the cultural point of view, it may be a degradation because we may not be trying to preserve the quality of the culture, but rather so-called how do you say, a fabricated version of the culture, something like that.
Even the word you use there, handicraft, suggests that what the government understands itself as dealing with is some sort of commodity as opposed to art.
Exactly. And I've mentioned it in my essay, growing up, even I didn't have a respect for this tradition because within the society also, thangka painting was viewed more as a craft rather than a form of art.
And when would you say that this kind of understanding of thangka painting as a craft instead of art emerged into the consciousness in the Himalayas?
Yeah, I think it happened so that when we started probably catering it to the visitors, we started churning it out in fast pace to meet the demand, and also then the focus on the authenticity and the quality of the work actually wasn't the main objective. The main objective was to make money, or basically to cater to the market. Yeah.
So by triangulating on what the customer wants, then you have a degradation in quality.
Exactly.
Stunning.
Yeah.
I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the monasteries as well. The bottom image that you see here in this slide is a photo of the main hall in Kopan Monastery in Kathmandu. And as you can see, it is marvelously decorated. This had to have impacted the artistic economy in the region as well.
Yes. Lately, I have been meeting many of the thangka painters living in Nepal. I come across them and then I talk to them. And most of these artists who know only very little on thangka painting are very busy painting all of the monasteries, So it's kind of a dichotomy, maybe one or two leader will be there among them who would instruct them how to do certain things. But again, I also heard there is a bidding system to get a job at the contract for the monastery painting. So
the monasteries are taking bids from artists to compete for the lowest price.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure.
Yeah, that's the sad part because for now, in hindsight, when I look at it, I view monastery more as a form of a university. Where the university, library, and museum all combined in one. Whereas, that was something that used to bug me. I was here in California and I would go visit my family, my parents in Nepal every now and then and would talk to them. And especially my father, he would talk about how it's very difficult to convince sometimes even the monasteries about the quality of the work, and because of the financial strain that they say they have limited budget and they have to finish the murals within certain amount of money, so they actually opt for someone cheaper who will do it faster,
So the monastery system and the factory Tonka system are working together, one might say.
Not
synergistically?
Not synergistically, not purposely, but it appears to be something like that, yeah.
So you said something very interesting, both in our discussion and in your essay as well, about how in the 1980s especially, when you were coming up in your apprenticeship, Himalayan art practice, and especially Tonka practice, was not viewed as a either sacred or prestigious profession.
Exactly.
I found this picture from the early 1980s on the web. This is Kathmandu, and I thought that this might be getting into your head a little bit about what you might not have liked about developments on the ground, and I was hoping you could comment on this.
Yes, actually, yeah, I went to a normal high school, and because growing up, my peers, my contemporaries would have a certain how do you say, they would think of Tonka painting as in a certain way, It's kind of like someone who hasn't gone to, who hasn't had an academic education, someone, basically it's not a hip thing. So, and I always, even though I learned Tonka painting from my father, it was not by choice. In the beginning, it was he actually made me study, And I didn't tell my friends I was studying Tonka painting. I was too shy to actually share it with my friends, and so it was to that extent. This whole tradition was becoming, viewed even by the society in a certain way.
Well, taking a look simply at this image that the visitors are looking at as well here, it looks like what what we're seeing is a thangka that is certainly not a traditional style that I recognize. It looks like something that has been riffed upon by someone who doesn't know all the iconography. And here it is sitting in a store with a bunch of bowls as well.
Yeah. Having said that, it doesn't mean like all the artists were not perfect back then. There were still like many masters, wonderful masters, who were around. Not so many anymore. They've already passed away.
This seems to be one of the major challenges, yes.
Exactly. But back then in the 80s, I think there were still many wonderful teachers who were around. And many of them actually would be working for specific monasteries or teachers, making all of these works. And but I don't think they had like galleries or or a store or anything like that. They would have their own studio, and it was mostly through word of mouth that these teachers would be like found.
But there was nonetheless a strong integral connection between the lamas and the teachers on the one hand and the artists on the other.
Yeah.
So there's a check on the iconographic authenticity all the time.
It was happening back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'd like to show our visitors a picture that you probably are familiar with. This is you as an apprentice, and what looks like, if my age and yours are anything like each other, that looks like about 1981. Is that right? Pretty close?
Yeah, it was 84, 85.
Well, that just shows how some of our age, some of us don't judge very well these days. But this is from the 1980s, and this is your father on the left, who was under whom you did your apprenticeship.
Yes.
I was hoping that you might be able to say a little bit about how the apprenticeship unfolded, and if that gave you the kinds of tools that you need to feel very comfortable with your mastery of the iconography on your own.
Okay.
And was that part of the training?
Well, I used to draw a lot of like comic characters, and when I was growing up, when I was quite young, 9, 10-year-old, and around 13, like my father thought like it's very important for him to hand down this tradition to one of his children. So because I was quite good at drawing, so he chose me, and I studied with him for about 5 years continuously. So just drawing something like the head of the Buddha in the beginning. He actually made me draw something like the head of the Buddha for almost about 3 months or something like that. And it was like not a vague 3 months, but it was a literal 3 months, meaning like I would sit right next to him in his studio, and whole day long I would be just drawing the head of the Buddha over and over and over. So I think this was the way he was taught before by his teachers. So it was kind of like an old school training style.
Seems very effective. Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, so it's kind of like by doing that, I guess you're supposed to, it's supposed to be in your second nature. And by that, like repeated drawing, also I think it helps one to see the very subtle like expressions, lines. So that was the case. So my basic training lasted for about 5 years, and then because I was quite young, it was too much to handle. So I actually, there was a scholarship to go to Taiwan back then. So I just grabbed it and went away. And didn't do thangka painting, anything. I didn't tell anybody I had learned thangka painting. So, and that's then after several years there, I actually, returned back to Nepal. In fact, that's where I met my wife also, and even she didn't know I knew thangka painting in the beginning. So I came back to Nepal, and then I finally like revealed to her, as well as like came back and started like again helping my father in other projects, painting monastery murals, etc. And I wasn't still really happy painting thangkas. It wasn't like something that I was really looking for.
I hear you, but right here you look awfully happy.
Yeah. So what happened was I continued to assist my father in projects until '98, and in June or July of '98, I actually came to America for the first time, and then the older Asian Art Museum was still in Golden Gate Park. And one day, actually, I happened to visit the museum with some friends. And then I had to pay, I don't know, $8 or I don't know the amount, but I had to pay money to get in to see thangkas, you know. So it was kind of a weird thing for me because I hadn't done that in Nepal. Like, and again, like I saw these very expensive catalogs, like very highly, like very well done catalogs. All these thangkas were inside like, you know, glass cases with like lights, everything looking very amazing. Basically respected to the point like where you actually look at it in awe, you know. So that was a strange phenomena for me because I thought like thangkas were just souvenirs. And then that sort of like hit back to me. And then I finally started like digging in a little deeper and then started understanding my own cultural heritage, the value of thangka painting, some of the really wonderful works done by previous masters. Then that's when I finally began to respect this whole tradition.
So unless I'm mistaken, what you're saying is that when you came to the States in '03, you saw...
Not '03.
98.
98.
When you came to the States in '98, you saw artworks that were understood to be handicraft, factory-made, treated here in their historical form in a respectful way, and oddly enough, I think you said interpreted in a way that made sense to you, which really threw me for a loop when I read that. Yeah. I was pretty sure that there would be some divergences there. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think that sort of like hit me very strong because before that, my how would I put it, like my understanding of traditional art was either as a ritual object or as a souvenir, and that was it, like not in the form of art. But after coming to the States, visiting the museums, and seeing these works highly like respected, and sort of gave me the idea like, okay, if the quality of the work is good enough, if they could be viewed as art. So I had to actually, then I started actually learning about some of the symbolism. Like I would go back to Nepal and consult with my dad, and it was with it was a choice afterwards. But before that, it was like just a means to survive. Yeah.
So on to museums. We do some things pretty well and some things less so. Let me find, there we go. Like seeing these days. And it seems like museums do some things quite well, both in Nepal, in the Himalayas, and then in Euro-American museums too. In reading your essay, it seemed like there were some things that we could really improve on, and then some things that might be improved upon in Nepal as well. Yeah. Could you say a little bit about the National Museum and perhaps say something about the Met or other museums of that type here in Euro-America?
The museum in Nepal is still in a very grave condition. they have started. There's an attempt from the artist society, and also I think the government needs to play a bigger role and try to. And I think we are still at a very infant situation as far as the art, as far as art is concerned in Nepal. Although it's exciting to see there's a larger artistic community in contemporary art context. Whereas the traditional art, as I've already mentioned to you earlier, it's more in a very, very endangered state right now. I think, in my opinion, what could happen is we need a support system because I as someone who was trained in traditional art, and I still have very strong emotional attachment to this tradition, and also I value it I respect it, even though I don't make traditional works anymore. I still have a very high regard for the tradition itself, because it's a very long tradition that has benefited not just how do you say, it's not just an art form but also a spiritual practice for many people. So I think it's wonderful if we could somehow preserve it, support it, and probably something like the museums can also participate in this, in preserving it. And what I've noticed so far is wherever I travel, I had the opportunity to visit many museums lately, and I go to Himalayan galleries, and it's always the artwork from 19th, 18th, 17th century, Sometimes I think we could be a little bit proactive in terms of supporting some of the living artists who are about to disappear.
But specifically the traditional artists.
Traditional artists, yeah.
Because I do believe that some inroads have been made as far as the contemporary end of things goes. Yes? At least some initial steps have been made. I wonder if I might show you a couple of images that have been part of this, you might say contemporary revolution in Himalayan art, and we can explore how it has definitely evolved beyond its initial stages. This is a painting that many of us may be familiar with. This is Rakbar Wangchuk's 2013 Spiritual Mind and Modern Technology. One of the things that we have discussed in curatorial circles a lot about a painting of this type is that we see a juxtaposition.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could comment on that and the kinds of juxtapositions, and rather simplistic, that we see right here.
Yeah. I don't know what you want me to comment on this.
Well, I was hoping you might say something about the West and our obsession with time.
Yeah.
What's the artist saying here? That we're obsessed with time?
Probably. That one is quite difficult for me. I have seen this work before, but I haven't had a chance to talk to Rapkar about what this is.
It's quite an iconography.
Yeah.
It's either very complicated or very simple, one of the two. But this is one of the directions the tradition's been going. You had also mentioned your interest in pop art when you were growing up, and there are a couple of others in your cadre who are also interested in that same sort of thing, again in a pretty elementary kind of way. And here's an image that I chose that many of us have probably seen before. This is Gade's The Hulk. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the difference between pop art here and classical Tonka here.
Well, these works, actually when we first started creating works that were outside the traditional iconography, people assumed that, it's almost like smearing the value or the respect of the traditional art or something like that. I don't know what approach Gade was having. Well, in my case, I think for me it was more of expressing my own conditions and my own environment through these works, like my own experiences. Having come from a place like Nepal, being brought up there, coming to America, engaging with a lot of new things, technology, everything, like many new things, and how I would see sometimes the dichotomies between East and West, or even like me in the West, you know, someone who has had some form of like Eastern philosophical training, landing up in the West, and how I encounter these experiences, you know. So that was more of a focus for me in the beginning. Yeah.
Yours is what we're focused on here is conceptuality, and what we're talking about with respect to your art is how these two cultures are impacting you.
Yeah.
So it's almost a transcension of conceptuality.
Yes.
Now, on the other side of things, in order to make great art, even great artists have to do all kinds of strategic things. And Tsherin, I hope you won't mind that I am going to show the next slide. So I hate to tell you this, Tsherin, but the more I was looking at this, the more sublime I found it. Those 5 fruit families, all the impurities cleansed.
Yeah.
No, but seriously,
well, actually, it was very ironic. Like, I was part of the Asia Alive program here at the Asian Art Museum back in 2003, and it was a whole month-long program, and I was here in my traditional Himalayan attire, painting thangka and demonstrating how to paint thangka. And people would come and watch me and then go away. And they came, I think after the residency, I got a call from the current Himalayan curator, Therese Bartholomew, saying that Jamba Juice was trying to reach her to see if she knew of the traditional artists, like who would be willing to make the marketing posters in the traditional style without the images of the deities.
And that was your condition for doing this, right?
Yeah. So I said, like, I will not have. They had some like examples, you know, that. And they were proposing to me, and I said, like, I will not have any images of deities, because it looked sacrilegious to me. And I said, like, I'll do without all the deities, but I'll put like all the other elements that we find in thangkas. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how it affected your artistic sensibility to be deploying your skills in this fashion?
I guess I don't consider myself like a true thangka artist. Sometimes. Probably it's because I never had that like drive to become a thangka artist in the very beginning. I always wanted to explore something beyond it. I guess that's why probably I didn't finish my high school also, because I didn't like rules and regulations and restrictions. So even though I used to be very afraid of my father and painted traditional thangkas in a very like good manner, I always had this drive inside me to explore something outside of it. But I didn't have the courage before. I guess it was there and I was unconscious of it. And when I had the opportunity to do the Jamba Juice, it actually gave me enough courage to like think outside the box, I guess.
Did you find this experience at all humorous?
Not then.
Do you find it funny now?
Yes, yes.
This is Tserin's Veeru Pop, which is masterful. It's as good as, pardon me, it's better than the historical object that we have in Awaken. Absolutely first rate. And you will also see our little Virupa there at the end. He is also in Awaken too. The reason that I asked Tsherin if he had a feeling of humor about all of this is that old Virupa here has quite a sense of humor, and I was hoping that over time the discomfort had resolved itself.
Yeah. You mean in painting traditional?
As far as the discomfort between using a traditional mode in a Western kind of context.
No, it was like in 2003 I was bitten by the bug to do something after Jamba Juice, but again I still wasn't like I was experimenting something in my own, but I had never shown it to anybody. I was too scared to show my works to anyone.
Which all of you in this room are going to find very funny here in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But the last thing we're going to do before we jump into some of your contemporary works, which are absolutely stunning, is I'd like you to tell us a little bit about this object, which also is featured in Awaken.
Yes. So this is probably one of the last thangkas that I painted. I had the opportunity, the Tibetan study group commissioned me to do this work for the museum collection. And I was really happy that I could have one of the works in the museum's collection, and it was a big deal for me. So I actually put all my effort, my skill, everything into this work. But again, after this work was in the collection, again I came to a juncture where there was nowhere to go any further.
You had to break things up.
Yeah, it
you
was
had
like
to mess things up.
I found a wall. Like, okay, what do I do from here now? You know, so.
And that was probably around 2008, right?
Yeah,
2008, 2009,
yeah.
when a whole bunch of us hit a wall.
Yeah.
Can you talk about hitting a wall on this one?
Yeah, and then so this was another work that I had been experimenting in my own, without the public view, basically. So I would share some of these works to some of my friends who were taking classes on traditional art with me here in Berkeley. And that was already daring enough, for me to show it to somebody. But I was too scared to, because one thing was I hadn't had any academic, art education. Although I was studying art history and taking crash courses on theories and art histories from my friends who were art professors or stuff like that. But I was still too reluctant to actually come out in open. And yeah.
You gotta tell us about that blue goddess.
Oh, okay. And then this work was very narrative and very symbolic, and I was just merging outside of traditional art back then. So to me, this blue image was more like an institution, like a bank or something, that was actually sort of
blowing up.
Yeah, taking advantage of just regular people or something. So it was my interpretation of how the monetary institutions were functioning.
What's the content of the inscriptions? The red inscriptions.
These are just like, I don't even remember now.
Aspects of the financial meltdown, if I remember correctly. One of the things that really stunned me when I first saw this work was the incredible juxtaposition is just an awful word to use in this case, but you're using this hyper-realistic representation of flying creatures, butterflies, the vulture there, and then also very traditional planar Tibetan technique on the blue goddess and on the flames as well. Were you consciously combining those different modes of representation, or?
Yes, I guess so. One of the courage that I gathered, actually I would like to talk about it here, is when I saw the exhibit Mahjong at the Berkeley Art Museum as well as in SF MoMA, at SF MoMA. What was happening earlier was I think I still didn't have enough information to understand the Western evolution of contemporary art history or whatever. But when I encountered the Mahjong show, which is from Chinese artists, and because I had been to Taiwan, I understand the culture and I understand the mindset of, and I had many Chinese friends also. So it sort of gave me enough courage, like, wow, maybe I can also attempt something, something along the line, because over here, this was from a culture and geographically also right next to Nepal, from a place that I could understand, like what they were trying to say, what they were trying to express. And that gave me enough courage to actually explore something outside the traditional box, I guess.
And the next series we're going to take a look at here took some serious courage. Tsherin, what is the conceptual framework behind this series?
Now this one, to me, I went back to my childhood. I was actually trying to draw information from my childhood. And I used to hear stories from my grandmother about spirits. In the Himalayas, we have like spirit of the mountain, spirit of the water, spirit of the valley, etc., etc. And I used to imagine like myself, we have traveled far away from our native land, and many of the people have moved on. Whatever happened to the spirits, maybe they also traveled along with the people, and how would they interact with the current situation? So that was my imagination, and I was like, then I started the spirit series where the spirits are interacting in the new world, new things. And so right now I think maybe it was my own alter ego or something like that.
Now in this next one, something really interesting starts to happen that's going to catch our attention, I think. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how this little extra something, this little extra bit of, maybe we can even call it bravery right now, emerged into your awareness in Neo-Conqueror.
Yeah. So I think even before this, what was happening is I started exploring several series. There was one series, when I was learning traditional art, everything was very exacting. The grid measurement system, everything, every line, every details, everything has to be exact. And I wanted to play around with that whole notion, like what happens if I were to manipulate the form itself. And even from a Buddhist perspective, maybe I was trying to look at it like, is the form, or is the quality of the deity, is it within the form or is it within the viewer, you know? So is the form so important that it has to be static sometimes, or can the viewer actually still see the form without the exact form, you know? So it was kind of a play between the object and the subject, I guess.
So the iconography is non-dualistic here.
Exactly. So I played around with that like form, and then it became more and more abstract. And to me, it was much more interesting because, again, like having the opportunity to exhibit my work in different venues, sometimes it was very interesting to see how people interacted with the work. Sometimes there would be people who have had interaction with Tibetan Himalayan art, and they would have this like familiar experience. Someone who hasn't had that familiar experience before would see it more as an abstract form, you know. So then it became much more interesting for me to see how viewers were reacting to the work rather than what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Again, less representational and more synergistic, more dialectic.
Exactly.
Excellent. Great. Well, you out there can probably see some of what's going on behind the jumping conqueror, and you may have an idea about what's there. What we'd like to do now is show you Tserin's masterwork, The Melt, which is kind of like what you're seeing here, but with the conqueror already conquered. So if you go into the galleries and take a look at this particular painting under the proper lighting, you're going to be able to really appreciate it way better than even in this nice digital image. It may be difficult for you to see what's going on at first, but I'm going to turn you over to the master and let him decode the painting for you.
So what I did was, when I was painting thangkas, I used to take high-resolution images of the works, of the paintings, and sometimes in order to like be able to make a living, I would sell prints. So in order for me to do the prints, I needed like high-resolution images of the work. So I archived all of those images in my computer, and then like when I was making my my contemporary works, then I started seeing those images again, like then started playing with it, sometimes in computer, sometimes drawing it, you know. So so it became much easier for me to manipulate my own work that I had painted in the past. So
I hope that all of you may be able to see what's going on here. What Mr. Sherpa has done is he's taken that image of Mahakala that you see on the bottom right and progressively and anamorphically distorted it so that what you see now in the main painting of The Melt is that same figure, except distorted, I'm not going to say beyond recognition, but into a form that requires you to use your active imagination to restore that original image. It's really quite powerful. But there's another painting in this exhibition that I think is also powerful in a very similar way. I'll shut up and let you talk about it. Here it comes. There it is. Luxation.
This is again another series. I call it like fragment series, basically. This series started actually around 2010. there was this idea that me, again, like having moved away from my local space and settling in America, and I saw many other families also from Nepal, from Tibet, from many other places like India, and they would come here, and nuclear family, maybe husband and wife, and having a children, and then they're always trying to preserve something that they brought, something good that they brought from their native place, and trying to preserve it in a small, minute scale. It doesn't become a whole, but at the same time it remains fragmented, but it tries to preserve whatever that they have brought along with them. So it was, I mean, this narrative actually came much after like I started exploring the work further, and then there was this project I was involved in where I had to make 108 paintings, same size, 20 inches by 20 inches. Somehow all the paintings had to be in connection with all the other paintings. Yet at the same time, they had to have individual identity also. So then I searched around and saw this huge thangka of Chakrasambara from the Metropolitan Museum, and then I started playing with this thangka's image, and then so that's how the series actually developed. And this particular work I created for one of my shows I was having in Hong Kong, and it was right after the earthquake. And the earthquake in 2015 was very devastating. I had gone there, I think after 3 months or something like that, and saw, and I was constantly thinking like, how can I project what I was feeling as an artist, you know. So then I chose particularly this Yamantaka or Vajrayana deity because Vajrayana is very much associated with overcoming death. And so I created this work, and then I was looking around and I noticed one of my friends who's also here in the audience mentioned there's a very powerful Vajrayana image in VMFA. Then you should look at that. You know? She even sent me the image. So I looked at that, and then that's how I tried to maintain the same intensity in the work. Yeah.
Okay, so you just surprised me here. Yeah. Are you saying that the Vajrayana that is here is the inspiration for Luxation? Okay, y'all, I did not know that.
Yeah.
But the Vajrayana in Awaken is the inspiration for Awaken.
Yeah.
Or for Luxation, excuse me. All those EN words.
Yeah.
Stunning.
Thank you.
One of the things that really struck me in looking at this work and in looking at it with many of my colleagues is exactly what you observed. It's that this can't be put back together. It gives you the impression when you're looking at all 16 panels that if you can turn them just right, maybe you can get the whole picture, but you can't. Mm-hmm. And it actually took several of us sitting down and trying it to see that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
May say something important about the contemporary world. Here, as we head into the home stretch, what I'd like to do is to show you some of what Tsherin's working on right now, let him comment on that. To my mind, this is some of his most magnificent work. It's a miniature series, and I think you'll be blown away.
So in 2018, I had to go to Europe, travel there for a residency, and also I actually had the opportunity to visit British Museum and other museums, and also I saw some of these miniatures, and I've always been very attracted to the Persian, Indian miniature, and also Tibetan saklis, those tiny little thangkas. And and my studio space in Kathmandu was also very cramped. It was very small. I had just moved back to Nepal, and I was still looking for a proper studio space. And because I had a limited space, I wanted to do something small works, create small works that is convenient to work in a smaller space. And I was doing a solo show at my gallery in London, so I decided to do a miniature series and recounting my experiences in Nepal after having come back from the States after being here for over 20 years. So, and then I started looking around images on the internet, taking photographs, doing all kinds of stuff. So, and also trying to project what I was experiencing in Nepal.
I was prepared to gush technically about this painting, but I don't know that we can see some of the anamorphic work that you had done with the melt here, but I think it's so powerful that talking about that may be missing the point. Let me show another one of your recent works. This one almost says it all to me. What does it say to you?
No.
This is Chakra Samvara.
Yeah, it's Chakra Samvara.
And this time treated like in Luxation.
Yeah.
It's as if he, she has been fragmented.
Yes.
Who is carrying what?
Oh, it's, I was thinking about because I was talking about the situation in Nepal, and I wanted to talk about the Sherpas, who climb mountain and who carry people's load. And sometimes they're viewed as not important people. But if you notice, in my works, what I tried to do was, in thangkas, we see many of the time, the deity figure is the central figure, and then ordinary being is sometimes trampled upon by the deities. And I wanted to reverse that and see what happens if I were to focus, as a contemporary artist, more on the human side of the image, and having traditional artworks in the background, Maybe they become in the background, and the focal point is more about ordinary beings.
I love it, and I love this series. Yeah. And in a minute, I'm going to give you a chance to tell me and everyone else what we need to do as museums to move this tradition forward. But first, I'm going to show you my favorite of your new paintings.
Yeah.
This challenges my brain in so many different ways, visually, philosophically, and I even see some references to contemporary Kathmandu here.
Yeah.
Could you unpack this one for us?
Well, this is about, I'm just making a commentary on the railroads coming to Nepal. Because the Prime Minister was going on and on talking about the railroads coming to Nepal, and I don't know. And I wanted to paint that, and also I saw all of these electrical wires. When you visit Kathmandu, you will see very artistic looking electrical wires. And I was inspired by that. So yeah.
I have to tell you, I just love the combination in this particular painting of the planar work on the metallic elements, and then the stylized hyperrealism. I'm not even sure what to call it on the main figure here, as well as the interplay between the dragon and the bird. Really magnificent. I can't wait to see this one in person.
Yes.
But Tsherin, I wonder if you could tell us, just in the last few minutes that we have left, what should we, as museum lovers, art lovers, museum goers, what should we be looking for as the tradition evolves in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think it's very important for the museums to play an active role in and also as an Asian, like someone like Asian Art Museum, I think we have a wonderful opportunity to take part in the progression of like Asian art movement, as well as like also supporting some of the dying art, you know. So it has to be simultaneously, I guess. So this is a wonderful example actually the museum can be, because you're both like focusing on traditional as well as contemporary works. And I think also to understand, play an active role in like, because we artists, as an artist, like we always need a support system. Without that, we cannot flourish. And I remember when I was painting thangkas here at the Samsung Hall in 2003, many people were visiting me, and I would encounter many people from Nepal sometimes. And some of them would come and tell me like, oh, I used to be a thangka painter in Nepal, but now I'm working at some gas station, or I'm working at some convenience store, you know, because we don't have that support system. And without that support system, I think the art cannot flourish. So museum can play a big role in terms of how to nurture this whole, be it traditional or contemporary works, you know, I think, yeah. And in my case, I was very, very fortunate to come across like many wonderful friends who are in the audience, who actually supported me like, you know, just continuously so that I do not give up painting.
It sounds like the secret to all of this may be recognizing that this whole distinction that we have between contemporary and traditional may be a bit of a figment of our imagination.
Yeah.
It looks to me like those two come together in you, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it wasn't a planned thing or anything like that, but in Nepal right now, what I am trying to do is, I noticed like contemporary group is all by itself, and traditional group is all in their own. So because I was trained in traditional art, and I mingle and work along with contemporary artists, I understand the both worlds very well. So I'm trying to bring them together so that they can communicate to each other and have a respect for each other at the same time, you know. I asked some of the thangka painters, like traditional thangka painters, have you ever been to a contemporary art show? No, they don't even understand like what contemporary art show is. And it's all happening in Nepal, like right there. And the contemporary artists would never walk into a traditional artist's studio thinking that this is just, you know, something, yeah, outdated or something like that. So,
but for the tradition to flourish, those worlds need to come together.
Exactly, exactly. And I think they can't be isolated. And museum can play a wonderful role where you can bring them all both together, you know, or have a dialogue among them.
We're going to give that our best shot.
Yes, yes.
And with that, I would like to open the floor, if we have time, for a couple of questions.
Thanks. Marvelous lecture. Thank you. Originally, these paintings were for only the highest levels in the religious orders. You had to go for many years to be able to see these paintings. It was a path to reaching enlightenment in your lifetime. How do you see your role? It wasn't meant originally for tourists or Westerners. Your role in enlightening or awakening.
Well, I think I put it in this context, like there was a limited access to visual vocabulary probably 200 years ago. I try to sometimes imagine like nomads going to like a monastery, and some of those images, if you are not initiated properly, then you're not supposed to view these images. But nowadays, today's day and age has like changed, I think. Now we have like Instagram, everything, like all kinds of images bombarded to us. So that kind of restriction is not there anymore. Having said that, me as an artist, I think I'm actually trying to share my own experience. I mean, like I don't trust my images will be enlightening or anything like that. It's just my experience, having a say with my experiences in a visual form is all that I can say. Yeah, it's only Jeff who put me in this show where it looks like it's an awakening experience.
Thank you. I do think putting the Sherpa in that painting where the Buddha or God would be is quite a statement.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for just sharing so much about what you do and what have you done in the past. I'm a traditionally trained contemporary miniature painter. So a lot of what you were saying kind of felt like reassurance. So I appreciate that. My question is that when you're a traditionally trained painter and you're producing contemporary work in a contemporary world where there's themes of instant gratification, but also production that is much faster than what traditional work takes. So how do you cope with just the pace of what you are painting with knowledge of traditional techniques? Your brush is moving at the same pace, but the world and the gallery world and the show world is moving much faster. Yeah. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, that's a dilemma I faced myself. I used to produce like 3 or 4 paintings in a year at times. And then I just decided, like I looked around and saw many, actually that led me to have some assistance. And now that also gave me another opportunity. Like I saw all of these problems that I was talking about earlier, where traditionally trained artists are only good at like paint application and color gradation. So when I hired some of my assistants, then I asked them, like, why didn't you ever go to school to learn traditional art? I mean, there are so many good masters. You could go there and study with them. And they said, like, well, unfortunately, because I have to look after my old parents, I have to do this, that, I need to survive, so I cannot afford it. Then I came up with this like very rudimentary idea that maybe, so I actually nowadays we set up a small organization in Nepal. It's called Himalayan Art Initiative. So where I started inviting this well-trained traditional artist who would teach my assistants every Sunday for 4 Sundays a month, and they actually get paid to study. If I don't pay their daily wage, they won't be able to survive. So, and this is a very small effort that we are trying to do, and that was another opportunity that I got to, like, get involved in this. But yes, it's very important to, I think, pace with the gallery race and this and that too. So I have some assistants who actually help me, yeah. So otherwise, like if you're planning for several shows in different venues, then it's impossible, yeah.
Tsherin, I really love how you're paying it forward with the local artists and training and going forward. I love the story about your dad trying to make you a traditional thangka painter. I'm just curious, has he handled you coming out as a contemporary artist?
Has he what?
Coming out as a contemporary artist?
Has he
handled it, or what does he think?
Well, actually, yeah, I guess so, because just a few months ago, not few months ago, about half a year ago, we just decided that my dad and I will collaborate on 8 works, and that will be like sort of like a collaboration between father and son. So I will do my contemporary thing, and then in the same painting he will do his traditional things. Yeah. So I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we only have time for one more, so here it is.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for your talk. I was wondering about the spiritual realization of the thangka painter. I've heard traditionally that they would have experiences themselves of some sort of realization of what they were painting. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if your father had that experience, if that was passed down to you, mm-hmm. and if you see that being held in other thangka painters today.
Yes, actually that's a very important part, I guess, as a practicing thangka painter. One develops one's like consciousness to the point where one becomes awakened or aware or something like that. I see that very much in my father. He is more of a practitioner than I see him half as a Buddhist practitioner, half as a thangka painter. I don't know if I got that quality, because I was too distracted by everything around me. And yes, that is another quality that is very essential for a thangka master, because you're portraying some of the images of enlightenment. And I guess, yeah, that's very necessary. And you see that, you come across like some masters who has that quality. Yeah. Thank you.
Is that it? Okay.